What's up, everybody? Something that's kind of been crossing my mind recently is just how many more Switch 2 bundles have been available in comparison to the standalone model. Now, obviously, we don't have exact numbers, and for the most part, most people have opted to get the Mario Kart bundle just because it would save them $30 and they would get Mario Kart. But I do think it's very interesting that while the Switch 2 has been fairly regularly in stock over the course of the past month at least, as of almost 2 or 3 weeks ago, it's been near impossible to find one that doesn't include Mario Kart. And this is something that I've noticed as far as the United States are concerned, as well as many posts coming around Japan where people indicate that the Mario Kart World bundle is in stock, but the standalone console is much harder to find. I think most people have estimated that it was roughly 80% of the entirety of the Switch 2s that were sold were Mario Kart World bundles, but I don't know if there's actual concrete evidence of that. Based off my recollection during launch weekend, the stock available in stores was like a 60-40 split, maybe a 70-30, but everything beyond those first 4 days has almost felt like a 90-10 split, and maybe even more than that. And while there's no actual concrete data that could give you a confirmation of exactly how many units were with bundle and how many units were without, no public data anyway, we have some ideas at the very least that we can kind of piece together. So for example, in the United States, the Circana data suggests that 82% of all Nintendo Switch 2 owners also have Mario Kart. And obviously, as of the end of the month of June, Nintendo reported that the sell-in number, those being the ship numbers of Nintendo Switch 2s, was 5.82 million, while at the same time, 5.63 million units of Mario Kart World were actually shipped. Or rather, they were sell-in numbers. These 5.63 million units include all of the bundles that were shipped out, whether or not they've been sold already. They also include every single physical copy of Mario Kart World that has been shipped to resellers, as well as copies of Mario Kart World that were bought directly from Nintendo, whether they be a physical or digital download. So whatever the case is, we know for a fact that a lot of Mario Kart World games have been sold, but what's been very hard to actually quantify is how many copies of Mario Kart World were sold for $80. Based off of a few different reports, there are similar patterns in Europe and in Japan as well, so I don't think this is necessarily something that needs to be broken down by region. But like I said, using some of the supposed data that's been revealed, we can kind of make a rough estimate. So part of the reason I think that on opening night it was much more balanced between bundles versus non-bundles is obviously because they underestimated how many people would actually go for the bundle. That's when they started slapping the stickers on the box in order to kind of make up for the pre-orders for the people that actually wanted the bundle. So in the United States, during the opening weekend, you had 1.1 million units sold, and then an additional 500,000 were sold through the end of June. So one specific pattern that I noticed on a lot of retailer websites after that opening launch weekend, and more so once we got into the actual month of July, was that a few of the retailers would put tags by a specific item indicating how many were sold or, over how many were sold. So for example, the Walmart number would say like 10,000 plus sold for the Switch 2 bundle, and with the standalone model, it would say 1,000 plus. I couldn't really understand how these websites would get those numbers to trigger. Sometimes they would show up, sometimes they wouldn't. But I know at one point for Target, it said 125,000 plus units sold, and that was in the past 30 days as of earlier this month, I believe. And then next to the non-bundle, it said 9,000 plus sold. So Target actually gave us more data than most other stores in this regard. So this kind of tells us that as time went on with the Nintendo Switch 2, while earlier on in its launch, it seemed like it was just as rare to grab either the bundle or the non-bundle. With the more recent data, it's looking like it's at minimum 90% of all of the consoles are Mario Kart bundles. I mean, within that 30-day window of Target, it was closer to like 93%. So actually, if you do the math and you assume that after launch weekend, it was over 90% of the consoles were Mario Kart World bundles, it might even indicate that that 60-40 split for the first weekend was much higher. It might have been 75, for example. Whatever the case is, when you mess around with the numbers and you look at the calculations and you look at the data that's actually been available through these websites, and again, I don't know how accurate a lot of these things are, right? It's just they're throwing it up on their websites, but it seems very likely that after a certain point of time, pretty quickly after the Switch 2 was launched, there was at least 90% Switch 2s that were sold in the bundle. And a lot of the reason why the United States only had 82% attachment rate for Mario Kart World is because early on in the console's launch, there were many more regular Switch 2s that were sold, so that kind of balances out to the point where it lands at 82%. Now, I'm not just going through this for the sake of going through the numbers, right? Like, it's a fun practice to make guesses on this stuff, but it seems more and more likely that as time has gone on, there weren't actually that many people that paid $80 for Mario Kart World. with a large majority of them paying for it early on. Of course, you might have people that ended up buying the bundle, but they want to have a physical copy of the game, so then they went and bought the physical copy as well. So it's not necessarily to say that even though 90 or 95% of all of the Switch 2s were Mario Kart World bundles through the end of July and early August, it doesn't necessarily mean that outside of that 95%, nobody bought a physical copy of Mario Kart World. But it seems very likely that at least at this point in time, the Switch 2 is effectively coming with a game. Whether you want that game or not is out of the question. Right now, if you want to buy a Switch 2, your only options are pretty much to buy it from a reseller, or you gotta pay the extra $50 and get Mario Kart. And actually, if this continues, in a couple of months from now, it's going to be the same situation with Pokemon Legends. And again, that might sound like a sweet deal right now because a lot of people do want Mario Kart and they feel that Mario Kart for $50 is a worthy value. But I mean, I'll give you an example. I myself, if I wanted to buy a Nintendo Switch 2 and I was told that my two options were either I would get Mario Kart World at $80 or digital at $50, I'd probably be like, fine, not having a physical copy is worth saving the $30 at that point. I mean, realistically speaking, I would wait and buy Mario Kart World used, but let's ignore that for a second for the sake of this hypothetical scenario. But on the other hand, let's say in October, I decided that I wanted to get a Nintendo Switch 2. I have zero interest in Pokemon Legends ZA. So what happens now, if most of the stock is going to be pushed with the forced Pokemon bundle, now, whether I like it or not, I have to buy Pokemon, I have to pay the extra $50 if I want to Switch 2, obviously. And even if I never play the game, that shows up in the data that this was a great Pokemon game that was sold, and it drastically inflates the numbers of Pokemon. So then down the line, when somebody's looking at the quarterly reports, or somebody just got a Switch 2 and they're like, oh, it looks like a lot of people decided that Pokemon was a great game to buy because there are all these articles online and all these posts on Twitter suggesting that of the people that bought a Switch 2 in October, 100% of them also bought Pokemon. So that generates all types of hype. It makes all types of clicks, and it's just more of that manufactured hype that arguably did not need to be manufactured because Pokemon would have already been a great seller. But great seller is just not good enough for Nintendo anymore. It's got to be emblematic. It's got to be record-breaking. And one of the ways that they're doing that is with these effectively forced bundles. Now, Mario Kart World is a good deal, and I would imagine that there are very few people that actually purchased the bundle that felt like they were forced to get Mario Kart World. The problem, however, is because they don't actually indicate how many people are willing to spend $80 on Mario Kart World, now they can create this narrative that we set a price at $80 and look at how many people bought this game. Because nobody's breaking this down, right? Like, I'm making estimates that there might be 95 or 90% of these consoles were sold for $50, or rather Mario Kart was sold for $50, but I'm making guesses. And honestly, even if it was as low as 60% of people that have Mario Kart World only paid $50, that's still a majority of them. But the only thing that the media will pick up, the only thing that people will look back on is that the Nintendo Switch 2 launched 5.82 million units in the month of June, and by the third week of July, 6 million of them were sold to customers. And in that span of time, there is an over 90% attachment rate for an $80 game. Therefore, everybody that's a casual is looking at this and like, this game must be phenomenal. People are willing to pay that much money for Mario Kart? Nintendo must be doing something crazy good. Whereas in reality, if this bundle didn't exist, there would be a lot more people second guessing that $80 purchase. Because there have been a lot of fans that were very vocal about this. They said if Nintendo was charging $80 for Mario Kart World, I feel like that's unreasonable, I won't buy it. But because they're including it in the bundle, it's worth the value for them. And likewise, upcoming is gonna be Pokemon Legends ZA. There are very few people that are looking at this game and thinking that it's something that's worth $70. And not even just in the matter of the price tag. They're talking about the way the game looks. It just doesn't look like a high-end amazing title. But what's gonna happen is it's gonna sell very well with the Switch 2 through the months of October, November, maybe December. And all of a sudden, it's like Pokemon, Switch 2, record-breaking Christmas sales. Where reality is that most people just wanted to buy their kid a Switch 2 for Christmas, and whether they liked it or not, they were getting Pokemon. But of course, this only works with these popular IPs. Because just like with Mario Kart, Pokemon also sells very well. But very well is not good enough. It's gotta be record-breaking. It's gotta set headlines. Once again, they are manufacturing hype. And I think this is going to be a pattern for the Switch 2 going forward. You know, I'm gonna take a wild guess here that at some point before the end of the year, we might get some more announcements. Maybe get a direct. I don't know. But maybe by the end of this year. And they're realistically going to announce some other big IP making a return, some big game that people are just gonna get all excited about and wait for. Whatever title they choose, it's realistically going to be sold with that bundle after the Pokemon ones are done. And if they continue with this pattern, there's gonna be 90-95% of Switch 2s available with that bundle, maybe even 100% by that point, with no standalone Switch model available. So it seems like you're always going to have to buy a game, whether you like it or not, with the Switch 2, and you can't just opt to not buy one. And that's also great for Nintendo because they're overcharging for their games already, so this kind of proves that they don't even need to charge $70 or $60 or $80 for their games. Because again, if you assume 90%, actually let's drop it down. Let's say it was only 70% of Switch 2s that were sold throughout the month of June had the bundle. That means of the 5.63 million units that were sold for Mario Kart World, roughly 1.5 million of them were people that actually wanted to buy Mario Kart World for $80. And that's assuming 70%. It's realistically a number that's smaller than that, maybe around 1 million, which, don't get me wrong, is still a good number. But again, that good number is not good enough, not for them to justify saying that this is an $80 title that everybody wanted. And obviously, if people weren't buying the bundle, a lot of those people would have spent the $80 on it, so that million units doesn't necessarily mean that if there was no bundle, then only 1 or 1.5 million Mario Kart Worlds would have been sold. But it definitely would not have been 5.63 million Mario Kart Worlds sold in that case, not at $80. Whatever the case is, this doesn't necessarily mean that Nintendo is not going to be pushing out any Switch 2s that don't have the bundle packed in with them going forward. But if this pattern continues, having a regular Switch 2 box that doesn't show any games that was bundled with it might be considered so rare that it's actually like a collectible box. Like you might get to be like, oh yeah, I'm one of the 3 million people that bought a Switch 2 without anything bundled. One of those rare things like the people that only bought the white Wii U, for example, because they didn't want the deluxe set. In any case, if you consider that Mario Kart World will realistically continue to get sold up until mid-October when the Pokemon bundle comes out, it seems very likely that if you're buying a Switch 2 from October up until probably January or February, you're going to be stuck with that Pokemon bundle. But we'll have to wait and see if that's going to be the actual reality. Anyway, the whole Mario Kart $80 thing has kind of been on my mind recently, and that's what kind of inspired me to go through some of this data. I genuinely think there are very few people out there that actually paid full price for this title, whether it's digital or physical. Actually, I shouldn't say very few. Like 1 million or 1.5 million is a massive number, regardless of how you look at it. But I just mean in comparison to the total number that's sold now and what the inevitable total number that's sold going forward in the future, because Mario Kart World will sell well. Anyway, that's all I got for today. Thank you so much for listening, and I will catch you on the next one.